nuanced discussion. Can we unite as religious communities? The idea of interfaith often dilutes down to so much where they had to. So the whole idea of, I've seen many examples, the ideas of religious exclusivity. Do you feel like your religion, or being a Mormon, for example, you are exclusively guaranteed salvation, and all the others who are not followers of this faith, so you don't have, but other religions, they have only the understanding that the followers of this particular ideological understanding, apart from that, they are not saved. So you can't have God saving the believer and the unbeliever at the same time, otherwise he's not just. Where is this justice of God where he lets people go into heaven when they are actually ungrateful to him, or he's unjust to him? It doesn't make sense. That's why the exclusivity comes in, where God's central message, his actual message, if people follow that, that is the key for the salvation, not every other isms and ideologies. Imagine someone says, I believe in deism, or I believe in scientism.
But I guess what it comes down to is there are ways you can focus on your own religion on a small, on a kind of not a smaller scale, but individually, and maybe with those around you. There's always going to be people that are curious and want to know more. But I think what Douglas is trying to say is, in general, I think that it's important for us all to be united in that we're trying to create more of a
united against who? That's the question.
Oh, I think there's a lot of people that are just actually just against religion in general, just absolutely against the idea of God, and not wanting to actually have anything that even resembles a kind of devotion towards God. They don't want to enter into schools. They don't want to enter anywhere.
Oh yes, of course. In an American setting, that could be something very, very serious case, isn't it? If religion is not taught in schools, instead, if you're forced to study evolution, for example, then that is indeed an issue, isn't it?
I don't necessarily think that religion should necessarily be taught in schools, but I don't think that they should preclude people from stating any type of belief or devotion in schools either.
So that's one of the things we talked about earlier. I'm just wondering, because I'm not from here. I'm interested really coming from your perspective as far as you're saying. I see pressure from the state in, I think what I see in the UK, but I definitely see it in the US, to say that you have to be accepting. You have to give more than just tolerance to LGBTQ issues, but at the same time, if a religious person or somebody who held moralistic beliefs tried to do and say the same things, you could not do that. That would not be appropriate. And I just want it to be even and fair. I don't want my children to have to. If they want to believe what somehow we have to. I kind of think somehow we have to get to a point where we can share schools, we can go, we can teach, we can agree that we can teach certain sciences, certain math, certain histories, and then leave the religions to the homes and to the teachers. But I wonder. But do you think we're getting there if we're getting further away? I don't know.
But do you think this particular model of education is better? Because when we want to educate our children, they need to understand perhaps different faiths. So you have a class of religious education where at least they're aware of the differences within communities, because they will inevitably be in a class with a friend, a boy or a girl from a different religious community, religious faith. So the religious education should reflect that, yes, you need to understand each other's religion. This is not about proselytizing. This is not about somehow indoctrinating our children to believe in others, but at least have understanding that religions are there, differences are there, and you need to live within these differences, within this tolerance. And of course, if somebody has a religion in which his religion is racism, of course that shouldn't be tolerated, right? So we have to have a boundary in which this extremist ideologies and belief systems should have a check. So in general, when we talk about the major world religions, which people need to be aware of it, that's how you're going to interact in every aspect of society. When you go to work, when you interact with people in the shops, when you buy and sell.
I disagree with that statement. I don't like racism, but if someone wants to believe in it, that's their prerogative. I don't care. I don't like it, but that's their choice. They can.
So you would allow racist belief to be propagated?
I would say not in the schools, but if somebody in their home wants, I can't go in their home and say you cannot be a racist. That's your choice. I don't agree with it, but it's your choice, and I don't like it. But at the end of the way, I believe in you should be able to believe like you want to believe, as long as it doesn't basically outward in the open world. If that person acts on that racism, harms another person, or does something negative.
I can see your perspective there in terms of you trying to say, I'll tolerate your view as long as it doesn't harm others or harm me. Islam, on the other hand, has a different approach altogether. It tries to address the root cause, the problem. And eliminates that rather than simply let it go, let it grow, let it sustain, and let it nourish and so on. So to give you an example,
I think we're talking across purposes here because I think we actually are not. I don't think basically saying, hey, I believe you can do this or you can believe the way you want to believe is trying to say like.
You're saying it's okay if you want to be racist at home.
No. What I'm saying is. That's their choice, but what I would do is I would try to address it and say, hey, you know what? I would share with them my belief, and this is what the root cause of that racism. What do you think that root cause of that racism is?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly.
You tell me what you think it is. What is the root cause of the racism?
People not understanding where they're from, where they're coming from, who created them.
Oh,
so once they understand that you are all progeny of Adam, the first human being, you are actually descendants of Adam. How can you be racist to your brother and sister in humanity?
Exactly. So we were the same. So we try to address the root cause.
So you address the root cause.
Yes,
exactly.
I agree. We do too. We try to. I think we agree more than we probably disagree.
I initially thought. What's your name?
Kerry.
Kerry. I am Mansur and Douglas.
Douglas. Yes.
Douglas. You're from Utah.
Yeah. So no, I agree with you. I think that basically you say, okay, hey, you know what? We're all brothers and sisters here. We're all, and we may view that kind of the family tree a little bit differently than you do, but at the end of the day, we believe we're all.
So there are certain things we can unite and work. One of the things, just imagine your child next day comes from school and says to your daughter, for example, says, "I'm a boy." As a parent, would you even have a right to say anything because the school will give all this provision, everything necessary?
I think that's what
this is what we are seeing today.
That's what Douglas is talking about. That's where we can unite. And
so
say,
this
hey,
is where religious communities needs to have a voice and have our rights given as religious communities, rather than simply saying, oh, this whole idea of liberal secularism means this is going to be enforced. It's a contradiction, contradiction in terms. If you're liberalized society, why are you then forcing our children to be accepting your views when they're happy with theirs? Mansur.
Do you think that it would be more powerful if religious groups as diverse as ours worked hand in hand together to try to basically maybe challenge that issue?
So that challenge, this issue needs to be challenged, but of course challenged in the most appropriate ways with political voice rather than simply individual voice. It's not going to work. So it has to be from academics, from scholarship, from governments and so on, because who are the opposition that you're dealing with? The opposition is not an individual entity. The opposition is an institution backed by political powers, backed by in fact maybe superpowers, and backed by, you might say, satanic forces around. So it's important that we need to drive this conversation, this challenging, in the way that is appropriate. You can't just simply speak to people and you think it's going to solve the problem, for example. It has to be challenged in a particular way, it has to be channeled in a particular way, and it has to address the root problem of who's controlling the narrative, who's in the control of the direction of the narratives. I'm talking about narratives of LGBTQ, all these issues of liberal, secularist ideologies when there's no belief in God and atheistic understanding. Who are you going to control? Who are you going to have an oppositional voice to? Who are you going to raise voice to? A whole country says it's a crime if you are homophobic or if you are this phobic or that phobic. What are you going to do? Because it's already legislated. So you have to talk about on the levels of legislation that there shouldn't be legislation happening in the first place. So how you are going to change the minds of
so
people.
That's where I was questioning in the beginning. Was to wonder about your perspective on, because I think that's something that both your religion and my religion could agree on, to say, look, we could work together in mutual ways to support your ability to raise your children in the ways that you want, and that we could raise our children the way that we want to the dictates of our heart. Those are places where I'd love to see more religious people actually trying to figure out where those common ground are, and saying, okay, we could, and then actually work to have political effect. And I've actually seen a few models of that I've been very impressed with. People who I thought were very ahead. Up to and even including some religious groups working with LGBTQ people to say, okay, here's the places where we want to say we have safety, we have peace, and we can agree on this. Let's try and get some legislation put forward, and then we can disagree on all this other stuff. And we can agree on this, and But the amazing thing was, is as they talked about it, as they worked on it, there was some more mutual understanding. There's too much fear in the world today because we don't know each other, and we don't know how we think, and we think that when we work together face to face, I think there's.
So we have a lot of common in terms of our ideals and goals, how to live in a society. With this,
and sometimes it's our problem.
Yeah. So from the Islamic perspective, look, I'm not a scholar by any means, right? But what I'm just telling you, if you want to understand how Islam approaches this issue, there's a lot of nuances involved.
Yes.
Multi-faith engagement has a lot of diluting happening within religious belief systems and practices. So the Islamic scholarship will say, this is not allowed, this is allowed, and so on. You can work within this, and you cannot work within this. There are many scholarship you will read where people are trying to somehow engage with other people by actually going against their own religious ideologies. You can't do that. You have to be faithful. Would you not? You need to be faithful within your religious traditions, within your belief system, and if there is a scope to work together, that's where you can. And this is where people who are scholars and religious elders, if you have that in your belief system, they need to drive that conversation, not Tom, Dick, and Harry's on the street.
Well, I think that both. I think it goes both ways.
No, you can exchange, but they're only the ones in the right.
Because if people are throwing bottles or words back and forth at each other on the street, it creates less of a harmony.
That's acute solving the problem. But if you want to solve a problem that is a long term that we're discussing, it needs to be known how to engage as multicultural society or multi-faith communities.
So there was, I heard somebody say this, and it was in reference to my religion, but I think it applies almost to all religions, that oftentimes the only piece of scripture, and you believe the Quran is scripture, you still call that scripture, right? The only piece of scripture that most people will ever read is you, right? So as we present ourselves, I just wonder about those things, and I'm no scholar, but I definitely think as religious people, I wonder if we're thinking too small about the effect that we can have on others, and just to say that, here's a place of mutual safety, here's a place of mutual peace. I definitely believe that there is salvation attached to certain things, but I also think that there's peace in this world, and I really believe that many of our greatest teachers were prophets of peace. There were definitely wars and difficulties that had to be done in order to, but I also think that God is a God of peace as well.
As I said, these exclusivity claims of religion needs to be taken into context of any kind of interfaith community discussions, and then you can see whether there's a permissibility options of having this engagement together, working together or not. As I said often, if you don't have that in place, then there will be a lot of diluting of your own ideologies, and you will actually fall short in actually believing in your fundamental concepts. You might have to say, it's okay,
I think what you can work towards. Actually, I'd like to ask, do you think that from interfaith concepts you can actually work together and say these are the 2-3 things that we can do together? Because they don't contradict. any of our truth claims.
So I mean, I would leave that with people who are specialized to make that judgment.
I'm kind of out of my
call.
depth on that as well. I want one other thing though, is a little off the topic. Is I really like your coat. That's awesome. That's a really cool coat. And where are you from?
It's getting cold.
Are you originally from here?
No.
Where are you from?
I'm from the Indian subcontinent, so guess where that? So that's India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. It was all together.
Okay.
From that region.
Yeah. How long have you been here?
Long enough, I think.
Yeah.
Many years.
I can tell you how long I've been here. It's been one day less than a week.
I'm going to be here.
We're just traveling.
You're traveling. You're going back.
So,
Yeah.
Awesome.
That's fun. Yeah.
Hey, that's been great.
So pleasure speaking to you.
Phenomenal. Thank you so much.
Because you're quite, trying to work together. It's worth reading the Quran to get the perspective the Quran has.
Hey,
Yeah.
we ran into somebody passing them out the other day, and I thought to myself, I have not read enough on that. It's a religion of nobility, and maybe that's the wrong term, but wonderful. You're doing some wonderful things, so I thought I probably need to educate myself more.
Douglas and Kerry, right?
Yeah.
Nice pleasure to you.
And
And safe journey back home wherever you're going.
Yeah, thank you. Nice to meet you.
You too. Later. Thank you.
Hashim said we should pack up now.
Yeah, pack up.